welcome to the Project Ares Pedagogy Series. My name is Brad Hayes, and I'm an assistant professor of computer science at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I teach classes at both the graduate and undergraduate levels. I'm also the CTO here at Circadence, the company behind the award-winning Project Ares hands-on cybersecurity learning platform. Today's video focuses on a proven technique for improving student knowledge retention. It's frustrating when students have clearly forgotten material from earlier in the semester, as if we weren't going to need or use it after the exam. And it's also frustrating for students when understanding lecture or doing well on the next assignment implicitly requires familiarity with something that was only mentioned once or outside of its useful context 6 weeks ago and never brought up again. This would be a lot easier if everyone memorized every aspect of our lectures, but that's probably not going to happen. People are wired to be great at forgetting things. Hermann Ebbinghaus's memory experiments back in the 19th century revealed an exponential forgetting curve, showing that just 24 hours after being exposed to new information, nearly 2/3 of it is likely to be forgotten. And after a couple of days without any kind of review, only 1/5 of the material is likely to retain in memory. Now, forgetting is obviously very important biologically, but it's not so desirable when you're talking about material that we need our students to retain. Especially if you're an educator like me, then you recognize that most of our classes probably employ some form of giving the learner all of the material for a topic at once, assessing their knowledge of it, and then moving on to the next topic. Unfortunately, even though cramming for tests might be effective on short timescales, like say overnight, it doesn't really foster long-term retention. And similarly, neither does our strategy of massed repetition when we're delivering our course material. Now, there are lots of approaches to optimizing learner efficiency and knowledge retention, and edtech products like Project Ares use a whole collection of them. But rushing to adopt new technologies without understanding the pedagogical concepts that will make them work could mean setting yourself and your students up for disappointment. One approach in particular has a great deal of supporting evidence and is the subject of today's video: spaced repetition. The spacing effect is one of the most well-proven phenomena in memory studies, and we've all experienced it in one form or another. By supplementing an initial exposure to learning material with reinforcing exposures over longer timescales, our brains properly devote more resources to retaining it, resulting in a demonstrably improved learner experience. Now, this isn't even unique to humans. Even C. elegans, a 1 millimeter long nematode with only 302 neurons, shows learning improvements when exposed to this spacing effect. This means that this is a fairly fundamental capability that we can take advantage of to become better educators. And the key insight here is that we can maximize learner retention by spreading material out over time and occasionally revisiting old content. Now, this might seem counterintuitive. We might assume that we should fully master one topic before we move on to another one, or that we should time the delivery of that content to be as close as possible to the assessment of it, like an exam or a quiz. But if we really want to maximize the long-term knowledge retention for our students, we should make an effort to deliberately apply spaced repetition into our teaching. Whether it's writing code in a particular language for a computer science course, or building valuable expertise with a complex software suite for digital forensics, or any of a billion other important skills, repetition and application is necessary to avoid knowledge loss. While the spacing effect was traditionally thought of as only being applicable to just simple memorization tasks, more modern studies have shown that this approach actually has similar benefits for learning principles, the building blocks that can be scaffolded upon, meaning that regardless of what you're teaching, there's probably a helpful role for spaced repetition to play. And as teachers, our most accessible medium to engaging in spaced repetition with students tends to be through our lectures. Including intermittent recaps of past concepts is going to provide opportunities for student-teacher dialogue, connecting the different topics, and most importantly, it gives students a directed opportunity to recall that information. The homework assignments that we provide give an existing channel to include spaced repetition exercises for the students to directly engage with, especially if it's feasible to include slight variations of earlier exercises into later assignments or as extra credit on them. Now, the goal is not to make it time-consuming or difficult. In fact, an easy problem might even be your best bet. since we just need to put them in a position where they're going to need to recall earlier concepts. The goal is not to trip them up with the earlier concepts. Now, in a lab setting, this could mean adding steps that reintroduces a tool from earlier in the semester, even if it's not really critical path for the main learning objective of that lab, in order to keep the student familiarity with that tool high. So let's say I was running a cybersecurity class on digital forensics. And let's say we used autopsy at the beginning of the semester for recovering deleted images and analyzing some EXIF data. Now, I can come up with a bunch of different ways to work a quick, minimal effort, complementary objective into some later labs, let's say a malware detection and analysis lab, as an added element to reinforce past concepts. Hands-on engagement is key to this. As many of us have experienced, it's pretty much never enough to just read articles or papers or blog posts to refresh our knowledge of something. We have to actively engage with it to really learn and recall and refresh. Now, sometimes that has to be in the form of testing or evaluation, but in cybersecurity, there's really just no substitute for hands-on project-based experience. And so in Project Ares, students can work through labs with hints available to guide them, and they can revisit and re-engage with labs that they've completed previously at the click of a button to get that hands-on refresher. Now, instructors can be part of this process as well. So instructors can disable those hints and use the labs as a way of performing an assessment. But providing opportunities before that kind of assessment for students to get hands-on exposure to the material can really help to build an accurate, very granular assessment of where those students are at in terms of their skills and how much they're retaining from the material of the course. Now, test-driven exposures are most effective when there's some form of feedback built into them. And that can take the form of any number of things, such as a report detailing which parts of the lab the student struggled with, or even just marked exercises on a test or an exam. But regardless, the feedback itself functions as part of this spaced repetition strategy, because students are typically encouraged to look back on the things that they got points taken off for, or the things that they had trouble with. And this, again, serves the purpose of recalling past concepts, past information for them to engage with. Now, there's no definitive evidence that suggests a best spacing strategy, but the empirical evidence is clear that the overall process of having multiple exposures over time is effective. A good guiding principle involves looking at how long you want the student to retain a particular fact or piece of information or principle, since that's going to inform the recommended spacing intervals, both from a functional and a practical perspective. Now, based on Ebbinghouse's research, if we wanted a student to retain something for, say, a week, then we might look at spaced repetitions on the order of 1 to 2 days. If we wanted a student to take something and retain it for a month, let's say, then we're going to be looking at repetition intervals of 1 to 2 weeks. But from a more practical instructional perspective, if we want to ensure that students retain something beyond the end of the semester, so like a 3 to 4 month time frame, then we should be revisiting and encouraging them to re-engage with material at least every 3 to 4 weeks. It's a bit naive to expect that the majority of our students are going to engage in these exercises or these recalls voluntarily on their own time, as they might not have developed mature study practices yet to realize the value. But we can help them develop these good habits by building them into our curriculum and explicitly making note of the fact that we're doing it when we deliver the material. And that step is actually quite important. So to summarize, one of the best things that we as educators can do for our students' long-term knowledge retention is to intentionally build spaced repetition into our syllabi. Revisiting earlier content periodically throughout the course through short refreshers or reviewing assignments and labs in lecture, and through the incorporation of earlier concepts into periodic assessments like assignments, labs, or exams. Establishing a strategy that exposes students to repetition timescales on the order of weeks is going to help ensure that the information doesn't fade over time. And including hands-on exercises that allow them to actually engage with this material and maybe receive feedback on short or immediate timescales is definitely one of the best approaches available to us. If you're teaching cybersecurity and are looking for an affordable and proven way to improve your students' experience and real-world readiness while avoiding time-intensive curriculum and infrastructure development, not to mention the pain of manual grading, please click this link or get in touch to learn how Project Ares can enhance your cybersecurity program.